everybody. Welcome to the Combat Zone. I'm Nick, he's Joe, and this is the place where the enemy only has four things to say. Abandon ship, bail out, take cover, and we surrender. And pretty much always in that order, too. All right, now, on the show tonight, we've got a whole bunch of things to talk about. We've got way more content than we're ever going to get to.
Hi, I'm Joe.
Yes, welcome to the show, Joe. Welcome to the show. It's good to have him around, you know. He keeps me level. He keeps me calm.
I feel like Jaime and Get Smart sometimes.
Yeah, it's like, you know, you got to have that leveling, stable influence. Otherwise, God knows what I'd say or where I'd go. Tonight on the show, we have a whole host of things. But before we get into the really serious stuff, like the Norman trial, we're going to talk about that. All kinds of different topics on the list tonight. The one thing I did want to do is we have a wedding in our family coming up 10 days from now. And don't get me wrong, it's a joyous event. It's something that all of us in our family look forward to. And it also brings to mind when I look at, because we're not perfect by any stretch, but we've always, whenever one of our daughters get married, and that's happened, we're on our third one now. We've only got two more to go, thank God. It tends to get expensive. So before the show, Joseph and I were sitting around kicking this idea around. It's amazing to me, like at least in our house, we try to keep things reasonable when it comes to being, I mean, it's their big day, right? You want to help celebrate. You want to do those kinds of things. And there's certain tradition that says the bride's family bears the bulk of the cost. Now, in some cases, the couple takes it themselves, but there's a lot of people out there who still follow that tradition. We're one of them. But we got talking about it, and some people spend unbelievable amounts of money on weddings. And if you're like me, and I'm sure Joseph can attest to this too, I will let him get a word in here in Edgewise in a second.
Well, I don't need your permission. I'm just listening. I'm enthralled, Nick.
You're right. You don't need my permission. And enthralling, well, okay. Anyway, but I've been, as an example, about 2 or 3 years ago, I was at a wedding, and beautiful couple, wonderful people, but they must have spent 30 or 40 grand on a wedding. Now, look, if you got the money, well, knock yourself out. But doesn't it make more sense that instead of spending a huge inordinate, and Joseph's sharing me, he knows of people who have spent $100,000.
Well, I know a few people who have spent in that range for sure.
Doesn't it make more sense, though, to keep the wedding modest and take that, let's say you spent $5 grand on a wedding, 10 grand on a wedding, whatever you want to spend. You set a modest budget. Because, look, I get it. Things are expensive. Like to rent a hall with a liquor license, that's not cheap. You're going to end up paying money no matter what you do. But at the same time, if you are going to lay down a cool 100 G's for a wedding, why not spend 10 and take the other 90 and put it as a down payment on a home? Or let the couple in question fund their own while you go and give them the full-blown 100K for a lifelong investment like a home, or it helped them get off on the right foot financially. Because the wedding ceremony, I won't say the wedding itself, weddings never end, they just morph into daily life. But the wedding ceremony itself is over in a few hours. And then everybody goes home, and the bride and groom's family gets stuck cleaning up the hall afterwards, and it's about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning before they finally get out of there. And, it's just, I just haven't been able to get my head around spending that kind of money on 3 or 4 hours of entertainment and celebration. I'm not against having a party. Don't get me wrong. I love having parties. I love enjoying life. But the pragmatist in me says there's got to be a little common sense here. Like, do things well, do things nicely. But let me ask you this, and Joseph, chime in on this. How much of a difference is there between a $25,000 wedding and a $100,000 wedding?
Well, Nick, you're really getting into something we talked about last week, and that is, what is the, at some point in time, the standard of living between the poor and the rich. Mm-hmm. There's only so much greater standard of living that you can purchase with more money. So people like to talk about income inequality and things like that. Okay, but, a wedding cake is a wedding cake. It doesn't matter whether you spent $50 on it or $500 or $5,000 for that matter. A sit-down plated meal, okay, whether you are paying $50 for it, or you're paying per person, or you're paying $500 per plate per person. Same thing. So is it going to be 3 courses or is there going to be 5 courses? So, blowing that kind of money on a wedding actually doesn't make it any more special. Now, of course, there's a difference between, your backyard potluck dinner where everybody brings their own food. And, I've been to those as well. And they're just, in my view, they're just as enjoyable. But there is a qualitative difference between that kind of a wedding and, the $100,000 wedding, for sure. But, are you really enjoying yourself more? So I'm with you, Nick. I think that it's appalling that people would spend that kind of money on a wedding. And there's also a really, another negative side to this, a real downside, and that is that, people who spend that kind of money, they set a precedent, they set a trend. And all of a sudden, the rest of the world, if you want to call it the rest of the world, that, and we're talking $100,000 wedding. Actually, let's do ourselves a favor. Let's reduce that down to $20,000 or $25,000, okay?
All right,
which
sure.
is or $20,000 or $15,000. So you have a $15,000 or $20,000 or $25,000 wedding, and before you know it, your peer group, okay, the girls in your peer group feel that they're lacking in something if you're not spending that kind of money on their wedding. And so it creates a certain peer pressure. And I've seen this firsthand, Nick. It's really unhealthy. Look, in my view, if you've got $100,000 or $50,000 or $40,000 to spend on a wedding, on a one-day event, okay, when they're just starting out in life, look, my attitude is, spend the $5,000 or $10,000 on the wedding.
Right.
And it's not going to be extravagant, but it'll still be nice. Maybe you have to go as high as $15,000, and put the rest as a down payment on a house or something, and let the young couple actually start to build a life for themselves and actually start to build some savings through equity in their own home. That's kind of my thinking. It's not a hard and fast rule, but I do think that, there's something wrong with people's values, that they throw their hard-earned cash at the celebration at the front end rather than thinking long-term, which, of course, is what you have to be thinking when you're starting a family.
Yeah, absolutely. I just have, unlike you and I are reading from the same hymn book, that it just doesn't make any sense to invest. It's a lousy investment.
It's not an investment at all.
It's an expense.
It's an expense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people throw that word investment around an awful lot, especially, in government circles. They go, wow, we're investing in this. And I'm going,
no, you're not. You're spending
the money. There's a difference between an investment and an expense. And money on a wedding is not an investment. It's an expense in all cases.
Yeah, that is very right. So the point I was making is you and I are on the same page on that.
We're singing from the same hymn book as what you said, Nick, and I have to say it's not often that I get accused of singing from the same hymn book of anybody or with anybody. But I'll take it because I know that you are saying that for the best of reasons, and there's nothing negative about it anyway, but I just I thought I'd make that point.
Well, I get accused of being how do I put it, not exactly flying in the same direction as the rest of the flock. Might be another way to put it.
Which flock would that be?
Well, it depends on the topic now, doesn't it?
Oh.
Like if you want to talk to well, I said to somebody, because I'm always having global warming debates, and he said, oh, there's this consensus. I said, you realize there's a consensus, just a bunch of dead fish going with the flow, right? And he didn't like that answer, but that's what the consensus boils down to.
Yeah, and there was once a consensus that the earth was flat.
I'm reading Dr. Tim Ball's book right now, The Deliberate, what's the title? The deliberate something of climate
Nick
science.
suffering from incipient Alzheimer's, guys.
Yes, it comes and goes, and it comes when I need it and leaves it when it leaves when I don't. I can't remember the word he uses, but anyway, it's about the corruption of climate science.
Deception? Is that the word?
No.
No, we should look. Well, you're sitting at your computer.
Yeah, of
Why don't
course
you
I could always look it up, couldn't I? All right. Anyway, the point is that whenever you have everybody thinking something's a good idea, it probably isn't. It's my dad used to have a saying: if everybody's running one way, turn and run the other, because they're probably wrong. And history is full of examples like that. Not just Galileo. There's all kinds of examples where everybody thought that this was the way things were.
Well, or maybe everybody didn't. I think, Galileo is an interesting case in point. I don't think everybody, I don't think everybody thought, for instance, the world was flat, or I don't think everybody thought that necessarily that the sun was, or the earth was the center of the universe and the sun rotated around the earth. And I think that most people actually don't think about these things one way or the other. And if you pin them down and they don't have any kind of knowledge of the subject, then, they'll probably go with whatever looks plausible. And guess what? The earth, the center of the universe, and being flat is plausible until you really delve into it. And then you go, okay, that's not very plausible. So I think you're sort of in the same situation. I think most people are just going along with what they're hearing because this is the only side of the story that they're hearing, Nick.
That, it's also intellectual laziness.
But if you go on the internet, okay, I mean, yes, there's a certain amount of implausibility, if you will, to the whole man-made global warming, climate change argument, especially when it comes to carbon dioxide, CO2, okay, being the main culprit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a certain amount of implausibility to that. I understand and I get that. And so hence your statement about intellectual laziness, if you will. Okay, great. But most people don't think about it. And if you go on the internet and you want to investigate and you're not very conversant in the fundamental basic science of things, okay? You don't have to be a climatologist to understand, basic scientific principles, et cetera. That used to be part of a basic education. Now, of course, everybody is well trained in gender identity politics, et cetera. But, come to talk about, what is a proper scientific theory? How do you measure these things? How do you prove causation and things like that? These are all fundamental basic questions that we used to learn in school. So you didn't graduate as a rocket scientist, but you knew when somebody was coming and talking about representing themselves as being a rocket scientist and they were talking bunk, you could recognize the bunk, okay?
Right. Even though you didn't know the science.
Right. So today you can't, okay? So you go online and you say you're not intellectually lazy. So you go online, you look up the information, and you're bombarded again with not so much the contrary argument, but you're bombarded with the climate change. The climate is changing. There's floods this spring. Climate must be changing. We must deal with climate change because one of the streets flooded from spring runoff. So it's really nonsensical, but it's plausible because people see the climate changing year in and year out. It seems to be getting warmer. Okay. Then it seems to be getting cooler. One year there seems to be more storms than the next year. This is all part of the normal
rhythm of the earth.
Okay. Right. Good way to phrase it. So, you can't chalk it all up to intellectual laziness.
No, I'm being pretty broad in that application, I will admit. But the name of the book, before you go any further,
you got the name
is called The Deliberate Corruption of Climate Science. Okay. That was the word I couldn't remember.
Yeah, no, it's a good book. I haven't read it, but I heard it was a very good book.
It is very good. I'm on just finished chapter 5.
So let me just finish this thought, okay? And again, we've talked about this before, but I'll keep saying it until I'm blue in the face. The real problem that we face is we don't have in the public square these days enough Galileos. We don't have enough Copernicuses.
Copernicuses.
I want to say Copernicusi, but I know that. My goodness, I'm choking on that. He's handing me a lozenge. I don't need a lozenge. I just need to stop choking on Copernici.
Oh, okay.
Copernicus. Anyway, you know the point I'm making. Okay?
Copernicus.
There aren't enough Magellans in the world. There aren't enough Columbuses in the world. et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the real truth is being crowded out by the nonsense and the flotsam and the scum floating on the surface of the pond, so to speak.
Well, I had as an example, on Twitter in the Twitterverse, I noticed a tweet. Rick Shirelli had a bunch of school children in, and they were talking about recycling and about whether or not the city should pass a plastics bags ban. And I said, I hope you tell them what a stupid idea this is. And then somebody got back to me and said, oh, no, it's not a stupid idea because plastic gets into the ground, contaminates our water, our groundwater, and is means that we're using up too much oil. That we should conserve the oil for other things. We're talking about going to a biodegradable bag. And I thought, who is this idiot? And I say that knowing I'm sounding harsh, but plastic does not get into the groundwater.
No, there are problems with plastic that are different.
Yes, but that's not one of them.
One of them. You're quite right.
Right. And we're not wasting oil because plastics isn't something we make intentionally from oil. It's a byproduct of the refining process. It's not that we'll never run out of plastics because when we refine crude oil into gasoline, diesel, and the other lubricant products, we get plastic.
It's kind of like the argument that we should all get off of our fossil fuel burning cars and go to electric cars, and that'll save the environment because the carbon footprint, quote unquote, of these electric cars is so small. And yes, if all you're doing is getting into your car and flicking the switch and pushing on I don't want to say the gas pedal, but
accelerator,
whatever the accelerator is. Okay. And by the way, I personally have not driven an electric car since, bumper cars in the local exhibition, or country fair.
They were fun.
And they were fun, but I have driven in them. I was in Washington about a year and a half ago. And I have to tell you, Nick, that, I got into a taxi and, I was in that taxi for 5 or 6 minutes before I realized it sounded funny. So, I turned to the driver and I said, is this an electric car? And he said, yeah, absolutely. It's an electric car. And so, I wouldn't have noticed one way or the other. I'm not against electric cars. But here's the but, okay? The production of electric cars actually consumes more carbon and adds more carbon dioxide to the environment than
a diesel car
use
does.
Of the regular petrol gasoline fired.
Well, they just did a study
internal
on
combustion
this.
engine. Yeah, I've seen some data lately about it.
Yeah, out of Germany, and they found out the Mercedes diesel, a 220, produces less carbon dioxide, if that's your poison of choice, than an electric car does when you take into consideration the manufacturing process of both.
Nick wants to cough again.
He doesn't want to. Sometimes he doesn't have a choice. Anyway, so this is all more of the absolute lunacy that wraps this whole topic. And I wasn't going to get into this right off the top. I do want to, if we can, where are we for time?
We've got about 10 minutes left in this.
Okay, let me doggone it.
So while Nick is having a coughing fit, nobody should call 911. Okay,
I'll live.
He'll live, and if he doesn't, I'll just do the show by myself because I believe in carrying on with a stiff upper lip.
Well, you're familiar with the show Top Gear?
Yes.
They had a code amongst the three of them that if should any one of them be killed in the making of an episode, that the other two would stand for 60 seconds with their hand over their heart, then turn back to the TV, and they would carry on the show. Like the death of one of them wouldn't stop the show. So if I keel over, I have a feeling you'll do the same thing.
Okay. Yes.
All right. So that's the deal.
That is a good deal.
The show must go on.
The show must go on. How did we get back into? Oh, listen, we can't let this go. See, we hadn't actually planned on talking about carbon and the environment and all that stuff again. But since we are talking about it, Nick, and we're talking about people, not enough people willing to speak the truth about it, and hence, you're being drowned out by the nonsense. Okay, but hats off. Okay, hats off to Cheryl Gallant, the Conservative Member of Parliament from Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke, who had the courage to stand up in the House of Commons recently and excoriate the government for having referred to carbon dioxide as pollution. As you know, carbon dioxide is not pollution. And that, by the way, that statement is irrespective of whether it's a greenhouse gas, whether or not it's culpable in creating a greenhouse effect on the planet. It's not pollution. If it was pollution, we would be dead by now, because what do? Our bodies produce carbon dioxide. Every time we exhale, that's what we're exhaling. So hats off to Cheryl Gallant for having that.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I have a quote. I tried to find the clip. And in Twitter, in this Twitter sphere, there is a clip of her standing up in the House of Commons calling out the Liberal government on this nonsense. So all I can do is give you part of what she said. And this is in part. The climate has been changing since the creation of our planet. Carbon dioxide is not a harmful chemical, and carbon dioxide is being demonized. And she's absolutely right. And to have the courage to stand up in the House of Commons where nobody else, I can tell you from having conversations with people who work up there, most of them know this is nonsense. But they don't have the courage to stand up and actually say it. And you've told me more than once, you can't win an argument you never start. You can't convince anybody of a point of view if you never actually make the attempt.
Right.
So kudos to Cheryl. I think she's an excellent MP. A lot of people don't like her, but that tells me that she's probably on the right page. When your enemy thinks that what you're doing is wrong, you probably got it right. So,
well, we sure hope so.
Yeah, no kidding. So I wanted to bring that up, and thank you for mentioning it. And I was going to bring it up, but I'm glad you did, because when people do that, they need to hear from us, and they need to know that what they're doing is the right thing. So I tried today to get a hold of her office in Pembroke. I couldn't get through. I'm going to send her an email congratulating her on it and encouraging her to continue, because this is exactly the kind of thing the opposition should be doing and raising this issue so that people will go, well, maybe there is another side to this. Maybe the science isn't settled. And maybe the conservatives might have a point. Now, there's some people you're never going to convince. All right, fine. So just shrug and say, okay, there's some people who have drunk so long from the green fountain of Kool-Aid that it doesn't matter. They've got too much emotional and political capital built into this that they cannot change their mind. It's like David Suzuki. He's never going to change his mind no matter what the evidence is. He's built his fortune around the other side.
Of course, we don't hear from David Suzuki that much.
You noticed that too,
I haven't heard from him. Not just much. I haven't heard from him at all for a while.
And now, to be fair, he is into his 80s now.
Is he that old?
I think so.
He's not a young man, I understand. But I think he's just, having worked for the CBC for so long, I think that he's just finally been fully assimilated.
We are the government. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile.
Yes, that very much could be his. He is 83.
Oh, see, there you go. Google in action.
That's right. He was born March 24th, 1936 in Vancouver.
Isn't that interesting? I didn't realize he was that old. I knew he was starting to get up there, but in his 80s.
Yeah, 83.
Well, you know what they say.
To be fair, I mean, that's a long, no matter what you do for a living, that's a long haul.
Mm.
So that might be playing a role.
And he's managed to survive 83 years of exposure to poisonous carbon dioxide.
Imagine that. He has a PhD in zoology, becoming a geneticist. He was a professor at the University of Alberta from 62 to 63 before joining the University of BC, where he would remain for the rest of his academic career. So his degree is not in climatology. It is not in astrophysics. It is not in any of the atmospheric sciences.
Well, look, even if it was, all of the things that have people wringing their hands and getting their knickers in a twist, Nick, no pun intended, are projections. They're predictions based on computer models. And as you know, Nick, garbage in, garbage out. And there are serious problems with the modeling, with the programming, the way it's been set up. Because, by the way, I think it's important to know that not all of the computer programs that are making these predictions are making the kind of drastic predictions that have everybody up in arms. There are a few that are very credible that are not predicting the kind of climate catastrophe that, as I say, that have everybody up in arms. So, but whether they're accurate or not, they're still just predictions. Okay, they're models, and the model predicts what's going to happen 25 or 30 or 40 years from now. There's no reason to believe this is not actual science. Okay, to a certain degree, it's clairvoyance. I think that it's important that people understand that. It's a little bit of crystal ball gazing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, look,
as human beings, there's something psychological about this. We tend to, as human beings, to expect the worst. Well, we tend to believe the worst, to expect the worst.
Being frightened.
Perhaps that's it.
Well,
but it's a real psychological trend.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the success of theme parks with roller coaster rides. Canada's Wonderland, Six Flags, Disney, you name it. Some of those rides are absolutely terrifying, and yet the lineups are hours long. Why? Like, I have no interest in roller coasters. I am not a roller coaster guy. Life's got enough thrills, chills, and spills that I don't need to strap myself into one on purpose. Okay, it's just not my thing. I would rather I've never been a theme park guy. Ever since they quit putting arcades in them when I was like 16, I quit going because there's nothing there. I mean, maybe the Midway's fun and, toss the ring around the bottle or bumper cars or those kinds of things. Or, there's certain things that I might go for. Or the Canadian National Exhibition, it was mostly agricultural back in the 70s. I would go to that just because it was something I was involved in. But for the most part, I got no interest in it. And I think that I'm, again, a little bit of an oddball that way because I don't scare easily and I'm not looking to push that envelope. So if I'm going to strap into something that's going to throw me around like that, I want it to be an airplane and I want to be flying it. I do not like roller coasters. Never have. But to go to your point, this is just an extension of that where people like running around going, oh, my God, did you hear about? And you ever notice that old saying in the news media, if it bleeds, it leads? People like disasters as long as it's not them involved. Now, this is taking it to the next extreme. So they're terrified now that this is going to affect them, and they have no ability to be able to understand or put it in context.
There you go.
Well,
perfect timing, Nick, because we are coming up on our first break. So, ladies and gentlemen, stick around. We will be back on the other side here in the Combat Zone on thinkradio.ca. Here entering back into the Combat Zone. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and lots of things to talk about. None of what we discussed in the first half hour was actually on our list of things we wanted to discuss, but that's what we do here, folks. We have a little bit of structure and a lot of free associating. And while I've got your captive attention, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping because I'm the housekeeping guy. I'm the guy that's not afraid to put on the apron and wash the dishes and sweep the floors and all of that stuff when
Do
it
you do
comes
windows?
time to do it, Nick. Somebody's got to do it.
Do you
but
do
I'm not
windows?
doing it. I'm not doing it for you, Nick.
Oh.
Sorry, Nick. You can't afford my maid services anyway.
I just wanted you to do the windows.
Okay, yeah, I'm not a window. Windows I don't do generally, so. But listen,
So hard to get good help these days.
if you're on the, if you're listening, Nick and I both coughed that time. It's contagious, Nick. There's something that we're allergic to in the studio, I think. I don't really know what it is.
Liberalism.
It's either that or else we haven't had enough whiskey because you haven't poured me any yet tonight. So where am I going with this? This is taking free associating to the level of absurd.
You were doing housekeeping.
Housekeeping. If you are in the on the live player page online and you're leaving comments, do not forget that it doesn't refresh automatically. There is a link just after the comments, which, by the way, are starting at the top and going all the way down. So you have to scroll down to the bottom. So rather than the new comments being at the top, they're at the bottom. They go down now. And there is a little link that says, refresh comments. So you have to click on that every now and then so that it refreshes the comment section. You're seeing what everybody else has had to say about the topic at hand. And you can join in the conversation live by calling toll-free anywhere in North America, 844-415-2115. That number again, 844-415-2115. And if you didn't get that, because I didn't warn you to go get a pen or a pencil ahead of time,
It's on
you
the
can
website.
still see it. It's online. It's right there on the page, the Listen Live page. Okay, so, Nick.
Yes.
Mark Norman. So let's get into this a little bit. It's a story that broke today. It's been an ongoing story. Vice Admiral Norman and his difficulties that he's been having with the current federal government. Some legal difficulties. But Nick, I'll let you get into a little bit of the background here, and then we can talk about today's developments.
Okay, well, first of all, he was accused and charged eventually with leaking sensitive information about a contract that was about to be awarded to Irving Shipbuilding for more either Arctic Patrol ships or, I think it was Arctic Patrol ships. Or no, supply ship. We grabbed a merchant ship, turned it into a what we used to call an AOR, an auxiliary oiler and replenishment ship, but they're basically called fleet tankers now, and so they got that one in the water, but that's only a stopgap till we can get our own built, and that's what this is all about. So, according to the Liberal government, he was guilty of leaking sensitive information about this contract to members of the media. Well, okay, so first of all, in the city of Ottawa, the nation's capital, and this is true of any Western democracy that I can think of, especially places like the United States, information is leaked every day, many times a day. It is the oil that makes the media in these nations' capitals run. It's not unusual. You hear about leaked documents all the time. So what he did is no different, even if he was guilty of doing it. It's no different than somebody on the inside, some undisclosed source, leaking information about either. Let's say it's something benign, like what's in the upcoming budget. Okay, we hear that all the time. There's supposed to be a lockup. Nobody's supposed to know what's in the budget, and yet it's leaked in one form or another, and not the whole document, but bits and pieces.
In fact, I still remember the days when ministers of finance had to resign if any part of their budget was leaked.
Well, that's been a long while ago.
Yeah, now governments themselves leak the information anonymously.
Precisely. So for the sake of the discussion, let's assume that he was guilty of that. That's no worse than it. So why are they charging him with that and not half the members of parliament or their the underlings who are in the public service just below ministerial level? Why aren't they going after them? Why are they not being charged? Well, because, first of all, I don't believe he did. And I think that what happened here was they didn't want to open up who was talking to who about how these contracts are put together, and it spoiled their plans for this upcoming $700 million contract to build this floating gas station. All right. So we can talk about the legalities of it all day long. That's not what I want to talk about. This, on the heels of SNC-Lavalin, because you made a point earlier today that you're exactly right. Had SNC not just happened, no one would even blink twice at this. It would be an inside Navy story, maybe an inside D&D story, and you'll see a defense writer talk about it once in a while, but it would never carry the kind of legs it's going to carry now because of what happened at SNC. Because even if the Prime Minister were to come out and say, look, here's what we did and here's why we did it. And this is why, in the case of not releasing documents as an example for discovery, okay, there's a whole set of rules around that. And even if he came out now and said that, no one's going to believe him. He could be swearing the truth on his mother's grave. Every word out of his mouth, truthful.
You're referring to the Prime Minister right now.
I am. Sorry, I should be more clear about that. Even if Justin Trudeau were to come out and do that and be as, do the impossible, actually be honest in every single word he said, no one would believe him. So the damage isn't so much the case itself. And I think Mr. Norman, Vice Admiral Norman, should sue these guys for tens of millions of dollars. If Omar Khadr is worth 10.5, then Admiral Mark Norman is worth 21 million. He's at least worth twice what Khadr was. So that's what I'd be going after. And as a taxpayer, I'm fine with that. Because this guy's been basically in pseudo prison for the last 2 years. He wasn't behind bars, but he might as well have been. So anyway, no matter how they handled this, they handled it wrong. And it's a systemic thing because they don't recognize the old saying that honesty is the best policy. This is why it's the best policy. So that when these things come up and you come out and say, okay, here's what happened, here's what we did, and here's why, people will believe you. But their brand is so damaged now that all it looks like is they're covering things up that they don't want the average voter to know about. And a lot of people are going to have a really hard time shaking that feeling.
Okay, but I think it's important in this case to remember a couple of things. The first is that nobody has suggested that anyone in the government interfered with the prosecutorial process here or the judicial process. That's not any part of the allegation. And it's the Crown Attorney who made the decision to drop the case. And the Crown Attorney made it clear today that nobody in the government interfered or put pressure on or did anything in order to cause the Crown to drop the case. Okay? So I just think, for the sake of accuracy, it's important to lay that out.
Well, the defense attorney made the same case, but the question becomes: does the public believe the Crown?
Well, that's a great question, but at some point in time, you have to have some faith in the system. And if the defense here is confirming what the Crown is saying, and that is that there was no interference, then you would think that the defense would be the first people that to cry foul if in fact there was any evidence of interference. And in this case, if in fact there was interference, the interference actually would have been beneficial to the accused, in this case Admiral Norman, because the interference would have been the government saying, you know what, you don't have a strong enough case here, drop it. And so there it is. Now, my understanding is that some further information came to light that the Crown, when they looked at it, they said, with this new information, looking at it, we don't really think that we're going to get a conviction here. And if we don't think we're going to get a conviction, then we're not going to prosecute. So, and now, what is that new information, alleged new information? I don't know. It would be interesting to know. And if it's floating around between defense attorney and Crown attorney, then I don't think anyone in the government at this stage could claim, Privy Council privilege or cabinet privilege or anything like that. And I want to go to that, Nick, because I think, again, it's really important that we understand the importance, of not to sound, too repetitive, the importance of knowing how important the important things are, right?
A proof is a good proof because you when you have a good proof, it's because it's proven.
my favorite John Cruikshank quote.
Mine is you've got to have balls.
It's a proof. And once you've proven it, it's proved. And by the way, for you guys out there who this was a former prime minister. In fact, I think he was still prime minister when he testified.
Yes, he did.
He was testifying in a case, and it was a corruption case, and this is the Prime Minister of Canada.
That was ad scam, was it not?
That's right. It was the ad scam. No, wait a minute. Was it ad scam or it was the golf course or whatever?
Oh, the got to have balls.
Yeah, that's right. The golf course balls. Oh, man, it's pretty stupid. Anyway, seriously, guys. Protecting cabinet secrecy, Privy Council secrecy is very important. In court cases, you can't just demand that the cabinet opens up its books and starts revealing what's been talked about by whom and when, et cetera, et cetera. It makes, I will be the first person to say that in a case like this, which by the way is fairly rare, in a case like this, it makes both prosecuting a case and defending complicated. Okay. But the principle of cabinet secrecy is still very important, and that's actually, safeguarding that secrecy is part, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is part of what led to these charges being laid in the first place. So complicated, but look, from all accounts, Admiral Norman is a very decent person. He has served this country with great distinction
for 38 years.
And I wish that he did not have to have gone through this. And now that things have been resolved, I'm glad that they've been resolved. There may be more coming, but I think, at least at the worst of it, I think, is over for him. And I think, that's good for him and good for his family. I'm glad to see that the charges have been dropped.
Yeah, I am too, because let's face it, when I was listening to his press conference today, I believed him when he said, look, all I want to do is get back to work. I want to get back to serving the Royal Canadian Navy, the Department of Defense, and the Canadian people. That's all I ever cared about. And, I'm sure it's going to feel rather awkward. As a matter of fact, he said as much in that conference. And he's going to, when he walks back into the NDHQ. But at his heart, see, this is one of the things that I think people are recognizing is that members of the military at all positions are cut from a different cloth than the average person is, especially politicians. To them, honor, integrity, your word is your bond, these kinds of things, they still matter. And, to be ethical matters. And that's why he had an opportunity to really come down with both feet on the government and on the crown and all that stuff, and he didn't. He behaved in a very professional way. He didn't lose his temper. He didn't jump up and down screaming and shouting, because his family, not only him, but his family's been through hell for the last 2 years. So he just took it like a man and stepped up and said, okay, now it's time for me to go back to work. No sound of anger or angst in his voice. And that really resonates, I think, with a lot of people, because there's so little of that, especially in the political quarter. When you hear it, it's always about who's going to knife the other guy in the back first, or who's going to get the next shot in. It's always this vindictive attitude. And you didn't hear an ounce of that out of Vice Admiral Norman today. And I think that's going to carry him a long way.
Well, I hope so. He clearly deserved. It's not a real exoneration, but I'm prepared to accept it as such.
Yeah.
And present it as such. Look, if he's guilty of anything, I think what he's guilty of is getting himself and it's a terrible thing to say, but getting himself through the acceptance of promotion and working hard and climbing the ladder and, you know, getting your way through the ranks. And when you finally get into a command position of this magnitude, guess what? All of a sudden, you find yourself plopped right square into the political arena. And my experience of good officers, military officers, naval officers, Air Force officers, is that they're not prepared for this. And so if he's been guilty of anything, maybe of being a little bit naive.
Perhaps.
And that's not meant to be a criticism. It's not negative. It's just an observation.
Well, how could you prepare for that? What kind of course could you offer? What kind of training could there be?
Well, okay, well, you know, like I the same thing if I'm talking to a rookie politician, you know, there are a couple of things that are fundamental, you know, very basic things. The first thing is politics is a business. And like all businesses, you have to have a plan and you have to have money. So you better figure out what your plan is, what you want to do, and try to plan it out as best as you can. And you better figure out how to raise money. Okay. It's a profession. It's a business. And whether if you're coming into politics from the ranks, or from the officer ranks, I mean, not the other ranks. And for those of you out there who just heard that, who know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. So, you know, there are a lot of lessons to learn, but the second most important lesson to learn is that you're never off the record, ever. 25 years, 30 years ago, maybe you were off the record when something was off the record. Today, you're never off the record, ever, right? As we just saw in the SNC-Lavalin case. So those are the two things. And the other thing is, you know, guess what, guys? If there's going to be any talk publicly about discussions that are going on in the cabinet room, let it come from the seasoned politicians and let them wear it, you know, for better or for worse. Don't play hero, guys. Don't be a whistleblower. That's not your job. I mean, and I mean that sincerely, okay? Even when you see things are going, in your professional judgment, are going wrong, in 100 cases out of 100, unless you're talking about some outright breaking of the law, something that is egregiously morally wrong, where you just have to stand up and say enough. You know, if you think the government is making the wrong decision, the wrong spending decision, etc., it's really, you know, say it when the time comes, but it's not your business to go out there and be a whistleblower. You've taken an oath to serve Her Majesty in a certain capacity, and I'm a very, very strong believer, Nick, in the subordination of the armed services to civilian control. And so the civilian government makes mistakes, and it's their absolute right to make mistakes. And it is your absolute duty to say what you have to say at the appropriate time in the appropriate place. And then once you get your marching orders, it's yes, sir, no, sir, or I'm sorry, I can't do that, and I just have to resign, sir.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is a healthy thing to have the military subordinated to the civil authorities.
Now, let me just jump in, Nick, and reiterate that I'm not saying that this was the situation with Admiral Norman. I don't want people to hear this and go, oh, you know, that's what Admiral Norman should have done. I don't know, frankly, I don't know enough about the specifics of what he was accused of. And I don't think any of us really know. I don't think it's really fully been disclosed what was going on, et cetera. And that's part of the problem as well. So, you know, he's probably had to defend himself to a certain degree with one arm tied behind his back. But I just want to reiterate, I'm not accusing Admiral Norman of having overstepped his authority or anything like that. I'm just laying out a general principle that I believe very strongly in.
But I think going back to the direction I wanted to take this is with these two situations fresh in everybody's mind, this is another torpedo in the side of SS Liberal. And I don't know, 5 or 6 months is a long time in politics. We all know that. a week is a lifetime in politics. So imagine what 6 months is. We're about 5 months away from an election. Will the voter remember this? I think the brand has sunk deep into the cowhide on this one. I think that when you combine the two, that the damage done, if it's not fatal, it's almost. Because when you combine that with the already low numbers for personal, likes, dislikes for Mr. Trudeau, and for the overall decline in the support, even in Quebec, for the Liberal brand, when you add this on top of all that, this spells disaster. And I don't know how he's going to recover from this. I don't want him to. I'll be quite honest. I want him defeated. But being a little pragmatic and a little, if a strategist, what kind of plan could he lay out other than going after Harper/Scheer, which is his old tactic? He's always calling the Scheer government, the Scheer opposition, the Harper boys, or, he's always trying to link it back to Harper. And Harper hasn't been in office since he got elected. As sooner or later, that old theme wears out and people get tired of hearing it. So we'll see what this brings in October, but I can't see how this helps them in the least.
Well, it doesn't. This is not helpful for them, but I think you're quite right. Given everything that went around surrounding the SNC-Lavalin affair, this fits into a particular narrative that paints that presents the Liberal government and Justin Trudeau himself personally badly. And in this case, it may not be entirely deserved, but heck, that's the political reality as well. Sometimes events take control of the situation, and you can't wrestle that control back. And I think here, the other factor I think that needs to be said, with all due respect and to the Prime Minister and to his government, I don't know that they have the capacity to deal with this. I'm constantly, almost on a daily basis, Nick, I am surprised and astonished by the inability or the seeming inability of the Prime Minister and people around him to react in an effective way to these missteps. I'm frankly, I'm a little baffled. And maybe even if I'm a conservative member of the Conservative Party, and I am, I wasn't involved so much in the last federal election for a number of complicated reasons. But, I'm looking back at this and I'm going, how did we lose to these guys? I mean, and I'm speaking as a professional politician, a professional political operative. I don't see the political talent in Justin Trudeau and in the Trudeau team. I didn't see it before. There were maybe glimpses of certain things that at that time were, I thought, really, really good. But now I'm thinking, okay, that was just a coincidence, being at the right place at the right time. And maybe it was just as much as that. But these guys don't seem to me to be very politically astute.
Well, if you look back over the history of this government, what was the first scandal they got involved in? What was the first bad thing that happened to them? Do you remember?
I really don't remember.
It's called the Phoenix Pay System.
Oh, the Phoenix. Well, yes. Okay.
Now.
No, I mean, well.
Here's my point about that.
Okay, go ahead.
They've been in office almost 4 years. They still haven't fixed it.
Well, because it's not their, they didn't cause the problem.
No, but they were warned that there were problems, and they went ahead and threw the switch anyway.
No, they didn't.
That's not the way I remember it.
No. This was a Conservative Party. This was a Conservative government.
And they said
problem.
It's broken. It has to be tested. Don't use it yet.
No, that's a misreading of what happened.
All right.
But I'm giving them a pass on the Phoenix thing. Okay.
Well,
it's a boondoggle, but it's not a. The real issue is, why did you have to change it in the first place? But
that's
because
true.
We had millions of spare dollars to spend.
Okay, that's a good point. But regardless of whose fault it was that we got into this mess, whether it was the Trudeau government not knowing how to handle it, or the Harper government, who should never have changed anything in the first place. The fact is that after 4 years, they still haven't figured it out. And that was one of the first problems that hit them when they came out of the blocks.
But it's not a. This is not a political. There's a political ramification to it, but it's a technical problem. Okay.
All right, but if you can't fix that,
yeah, but this is like take it for example. If you have an incompetent doctor, okay, and the doctor does something in surgery that is harmful to the patient, okay. It's not the fault of the healthcare system; it's the fault of the doctor.
But who? Okay, but excuse me.
And the government, and so if you hire a team of doctors to fix that medical problem, okay, and those team of doctors don't fix that medical problem or don't deal with the original problem from the original doctor, okay, it's not necessarily the government's fault. I do know that they're trying to do things to fix the problem. But it's technical problems. I give them a pass on the Phoenix thing.
I'm not so quick to do that because, to go back to your doctor analogy, if the issues and the management, if the management of that particular unit of the healthcare system continue to employ that guy or don't do something to make sure that it doesn't happen again, then they're just as guilty as the doctor is.
Yeah, I understand. But what the only answer to that then is scrap the whole system and put a brand new system in.
Well, why didn't they do that then?
Well, they're actually looking at doing that, okay? But that's
4 years later.
It's not 4 years later. You're talking about a multi-year project, okay? They don't just wake up one morning and go, okay, let's take this out of the box. When we got it on the shelf, take it out of the box, put the CD in or the DVD into our local computer, and presto, we've got a brand new pay system, okay? They're actually planning on possibly changing it to a brand new system and dumping Phoenix altogether. But that's not going to happen overnight, Nick.
No, I agree with you.
So when you say they're not doing it, they are doing it.
Just a minute. How long does it take a mechanic to decide the engine is toast in a car? He runs a few preliminary checks and he knows.
Yes, but you don't automatically, they try to fix the engine, okay? You don't just automatically go, okay, something's wrong here, let's throw the car in the garbage.
When you got a piston sticking out the side of the block, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the engine's done.
Well, it's a little more complicated than
I know,
that.
I'm being simplistic.
And they're
for the sake of
and we're
discussion.
talking about tens of millions of dollars that have been invested in this, okay? And so what they want to do is they want to try to fix it. And so and once they've decided, there are just too many problems here, we have to start from scratch. And that's the decision has been made. And they're talking now about putting together a program to start from scratch, which I don't agree with, by the way. But I'm just saying on this one, it's not the government saying, oh, we're not dealing with this very effectively. Okay.
Okay. So you and I are going to gently disagree on Phoenix Pay System.
Okay, you know what? We have to go for a break, Dick. We're way over time. Okay?
Oh, okay, good.
So let's go for a break. We'll pick this up again when we come back.
Fair enough, because believe me, I'm just getting started.
I know. This is what happens when you free associate, right?
That's right.
Okay, we'll be back here to the combat zone in a couple of minutes, guys. Okay.
Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. Joseph and I were busy going hammer and tong.
We were in combat with one another.
You got that right. We don't always agree on everything. And I'm just going to pick that up from where we left off. The reason, look, okay, so everybody knows what our particular position is. I'm very much more blue collar in my approach about this. You don't spend money on an engine that's blown. You replace it. And you don't need to take that long to figure it out. So that's my position. Joseph's is a little different than that. Okay, but going back to this idea The reason I brought up that was to demonstrate that all through the whole history of this government, it's been one boondoggle after another. We haven't talked about Huawei yet. We haven't talked about his disastrous trip to India. We haven't talked about free trade and what happened there with the Americans. I mean, one mess after another. This guy, you know, this is the same guy who thinks the economy grows from the heart, right? And the books will balance themselves. In other words, there have been warning flags all along telling us that this guy is not fit to be a used sock salesman, never mind to be the prime minister.
Well, maybe he is fit to be a used sock salesman.
Well, they'd have to be mighty old socks.
Look, I don't disagree with you. I have a lot of respect for the office of prime minister, and so I'm prepared to, even if my political opponents are in office, I'm prepared to give them a certain amount of respect and dignity, if you will, that I think they're owed by virtue of the fact that they are in office. And I still think that that's important, but I do agree with you. I think that as time has gone on, that Mr. Trudeau has demonstrated, and not just him, but his government have demonstrated
his choice of cabinet ministers
repeatedly that they're not fit to govern. Now, just as a talking point, and I want to loop back to the Phoenix system very briefly in a minute, okay? But just as a to be a little bit more provocative, okay? You mentioned, look at the cabinet he chose, but look at the material that he had to choose from to choose his cabinet. So yes, I understand you're not in favor of gender balance as a matter of principle. I'm with you on that. I think you choose your cabinet
based on the most qualified people you have.
Okay, but there are certain things that you have to balance. There has to be a certain amount of geographical balance as well. You have to take a number of factors into consideration, but merit is the single most important one. Okay, this notion that you have to have gender balance in your cabinet, I think, is just absurd. I think that men and women, if they are truly equal, then you don't get into questions about gender balance. So, but he, apart from that, look at the mediocrity of the people that he had to choose from. And what I want to say about being provocative is this, okay? This is not a problem that's limited to the Liberals. This is a problem with respect to members of Parliament in general. We're not getting the cream of the crop running for public office, whether it's in the House of Commons or it's in your provincial legislature or in local municipal councils. It's a real problem. And I don't know whether it's something that reflects a general degradation of the quality of people in society. I don't know, Nick. Okay. And, I'm excuse me while I pause to try to take my foot out of my mouth. Okay. Cause I know I'm going to hear from my friends in the Conservative Party and members of Parliament who are my friends who go, are you calling me mediocre? And I'm going, well, no, I'm not calling any individual mediocre. I'm just saying, who are the standouts, the pillars of society and business and that, and in their professions that you could point to in the House of Commons? Who are the bright and knowledgeable and brilliant debaters and orators in the House? I can't think of a single person in the House of Commons that can actually speak. Although one person, no, let me correct that. I have to say, I'm very impressed with Pierre Poilievre.
I was going to say he was going to be my example.
I've seen Pierre. I've known Pierre for a number of years, and I've only just recently watched him in action in Question Period, and his ability to think and speak on his feet. He's impressed me. But
yes.
Is that because he's really great, or is that because people
everybody else is so
around are so mediocre? I just don't know. I think it's a real problem.
During World War II, Mackenzie King, who was a Liberal Prime Minister at the time, had his $1-a-day men. Now, you probably know about this, but for those who don't, what he did was he went to captains of industry, captains of finance, all the important movers and shakers within Canadian society, and he hired them for $1 a year for the duration of the war. And they were the people who knew what they were talking about, who could get ships built, who could get armies trained, who could get supplies and logistics to where they needed to go. all the things it took for Canada to fight a war 8,000 miles away, and was hugely successful in that effort. Those people are the kind of people that you would want today in your cabinet. But
Right,
at the same time, what person of any kind of quality, and I'm making exceptions, like Pierre Poilievre is one of them. I would include Cheryl Gallant because of her courageous stand the other day in the House of Commons. What kind of people who are that quality or above, let's put it that way, would expose themselves to the kind of rectal exam that you now have to go through in order to become eligible to run? Never mind actually end up in government, but just to get through the screening process.
Well, unfortunately, the screening process is set up in such a way from all of the political parties' points of view to weed out the independent thinkers, the captains of industry.
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
In other words, what these guys want, okay, are trained SEALs. If you're not going to be a trained SEAL, then you're not qualified to be a member of the House of Commons.
Randy Hillier.
It's a real problem, Nick.
You sit and watch Question Period, whether it's the leader of the opposition or the prime minister, everybody behind them is nodding in agreement. It's like bobblehead dolls. I mean, look, I'm not saying you never stand and applaud something somebody said, but every time they get up, is Churchillian to the point where you have to stand and applaud? Doesn't that just denigrate everything the guy says?
Well, if everything is worth applause, nothing is worth applause.
Exactly. You took the words right out of my mouth.
I could tell you I could see them on the tip of your tongue.
Yeah, right there.
Listen, I'm looking at Marin's comment. I just want to say this. Marin, I appreciate your comment about Phoenix. The reason I'm pushing back so hard on this is actually, I actually have close family members that are very involved in trying to fix the problems. Okay, so I totally understand what you're saying, and I'm not unaware of the complexity, and complexity is the right word here. They should never have thrown the switch, but they should never have wanted to to change the system in the first place. There was really no compelling need for it, and as with all new computer systems, etc., programming in that, you're going to have glitches. So what happened here is when the glitches started to appear, which was right at the very beginning, given the amount of money time that was invested in the writing of this program, because remember, this was not something they just took off the shelf. Okay. It made perfect sense to spend time and energy trying to find the problem and fix them. And then when they'd fix one problem, another problem would happen. And then they'd fix that problem, and then there would be another problem. And of course, many, many people have been very badly, detrimentally affected by this. The truth is that most civil servants have not been negatively impacted by Phoenix. I'm not meant to diminish the problems that those who have been impacted are having to face, in some cases, as you point out, very serious problems. But now what they've done is, my understanding is that the government now has in fact reached the point where they're saying that it's beyond repair, and now they're stuck with having to go back to the drawing board, essentially, because you don't just flick another switch and you're back to the old system. The old system is gone now, and so they have to go back now and design from scratch. So this is a problem that's going to take, frankly, years to fix. This is not going to be fixed overnight. And when I say they know about this, I mean, they didn't just decide last week that it's time to pull the plug, figuratively speaking, on Phoenix. They've known for quite some time, and they are working on it. But it's going to take time to put together a new system that's going to replace Phoenix. And I got to tell you, there's no guarantee that the new system is going to work any better than the Phoenix system does. So it's a terrible situation, and there's a lot of blame to go around here. See, this is the thing, Nick. This is why I'm in the Conservative Party. I'm close to the inner circle of the Conservative Party, but I'm not always trusted by everybody in the inner circle because I am one of those independent thinkers, okay? And I call them like I see them. I'm not throwing the blame at the Conservative Party for the way that Phoenix is working, but I am going to throw the blame at the Conservative Party and government for having made the decision to change it in the first place when there really wasn't a compelling reason to do that. Okay, but that said, enough blame to go around. Time to fix the problem. We have spent far too much time on the Phoenix system here. And it's not even on our list of things to do. Nick, tomorrow here in the nation's capital is the annual March for Life.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
I do not mind at all. This is an annual event. It's one of the largest protests in the country. And last year, what were the numbers? 15, 20,000?
I don't know.
It's somewhere in that ballpark. It gets bigger every year. And our national broadcaster seems to take a little longer every year to tell people that it happened. They never put it in the right context. It's the pro-life march, not the anti-abortion march, because there's more to pro-life than just abortion. There's the way that I think of it is the reinstilling of the sacredness of life in society is a better definition of what the pro-life movement's all about than it is just being opposed to abortion. Now, a lot of it gets focused on that because that is one of the primary problems in our society, as I see it, and so do a lot of millions of other Canadians. If you can't defend those people at that stage in life, then who can you defend? Excuse me again. But at the same time, there's more to it than that. Anyway, so I don't know what the number's going to be tomorrow. I know I'll be watching the coverage very closely, and it's just, I guess for me the biggest question about it isn't so much whether or not it's a little bigger every year, which I think is a good thing, but it's whether or not it's actually effective. Because I think within the movement, and like you, I'm going to probably hear some backlash about this, but you have to ask yourself, they've been doing this now for ever since Canada struck down the anti-abortion laws and told the government to come back with something new, and they never did. That's different than...
Right, 1978, I think, was the first March for Life.
Right. So, for what's that, 70, 80, 90, 2000, 2010?
40, this would be the 41st, I believe it is.
40, okay, so I was going to say at least 40 years.
Yeah.
And in that 40 years, what's changed? What successes can they point to? And I think the answer is, if there are any, they're mighty small. So the question now becomes, I'm not saying you should stop the March for Life, but I am saying you need to broaden and you need to take a step back, and I'm talking to the pro-life people now. You need to take a step back, think about what you're doing, because if all you're doing is beating your head against the wall, it's got to hurt sooner or later. You have to change what you're doing. You have to broaden out what you want to accomplish and the different tactics used to achieve your end. Maybe the March for Life plays a critical role, but it's like having one weapon in your arsenal if you're in an army trying to siege a castle. If all you've got are, guys on horseback, it doesn't matter how many times you send them charging at the walls, they're going to get killed. If you don't have battering rams and trebuchets and, your own archers and things like that, you don't have a well-balanced army, you are not going to win.
Right. Well, here's the good news. First of all, point well taken, Nick. I do think that the March for Life and the demonstration is important. I regret the fact that it's so small. It's large in terms of the Canadian experience for marches on Parliament Hill, but it could be a lot larger, and I would like to see it growing. And it'll be interesting to see, we were talking about this earlier, it'll be really interesting to see, first of all, whether it gets any news coverage at all, given the fact that it is, I think, pretty sure it's safe to say that it's the largest demonstration on Parliament Hill every year. So it'd be interesting to see whether the media actually covers it. and if they do cover it, it'll be interesting to see how many people they say participated. So that, if you're listening into the show tonight, leave us a comment actually, or call us 844-415-2115, and let's see what your thoughts are. How many people do you think that the media will the media cover this, and how many people do you think that they're going to say? So let's have some predictions, or you can leave the predictions or comments in the comment section online. But Nick, there is some good news here, and the good news is that the pro-life movement is I think it's fair to say going through a transitional phase right now, where a lot of the pioneers that stepped into the fight without any real previous experience in the political arena or in public advocacy, but somebody had to pick up the ball and run with it. And there are a number of people who did that, and they did it to their great credit when no one else would. And this is one of the things that they organized. So there was the March for Life, there's the Rose Dinner, there's a number of events around the March for Life. And I think that people should be grateful for the incredible effort that these people have put in. Whether it's been ultimately effective or not, they stepped into the breach when somebody had to step into the breach, and I think they deserve our thanks and our great respect for having done that. But now everybody's getting a little older, a little longer in the tooth, and we see now a transitional period where now there are younger people who have been working in the political and public advocacy realm, and who are getting involved in new organizations, getting involved in existing well-established organizations that are now and have been for the last number of years expanding. Campaign Life Coalition has been doing a fantastic job of going out and recruiting and marshaling support for pro-life political candidates. Long way to go still, but they've been doing a great job in that respect. So I think you're seeing an evolution, and I think over the next 4, 5, 6 years, I think that you will see the pro-life movement becoming much, much, much more effective.
Well, I don't mean to sound like I was criticizing those who had gone before. My only point was...
Well, it's legitimate criticism, okay? Yeah. I mean, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. It's none of it is meant to be personal.
Yeah, that's right.
But the reality is, Nick, that we haven't really moved the goalpost.
And that was, okay? Yeah, I'm just looking at cause and effect. Especially when you look into the United States at the massive movement and successes they're having at every level of government in the United States right now. There are all kinds of anti-abortion legislation being passed now that 10 years ago nobody would have ever even dreamed of. So there's, and it's also true that culturally we usually follow about 10 years behind the Americans. So if that's the case, then good times, better times are coming on this front. So I'm not trying to try to denigrate what they've been doing. The only point I'm making is that maybe it's time, and I'm glad to hear about the renaissance, about the paradigm shift, if you want to call it that, within the leadership of the organization. Because hats off to those who led the charge, as you pointed out. But at the same time, sooner or later, you have to make way for new people. Let me give you just an example. In our town, my mayor in Killaloe has been there for 31 years. Time for her to step aside. No matter how good a mayor she is, 31 years is a long time to be mayor of a small town. And I think that this next time she may retire. She won last time without even advertising. She donated all her campaign contributions and all that to a charity. And she won handily. Anyway, the point is that sooner or later, everybody's time, best before time, gets here. And you have to accept the fact that now you have to hand the torch off to somebody else. So I'm delighted to hear that.
But there's a long way to go still. And I think, I'm frankly, if you're if you're pro-life and you want to be involved in the movement and in movement building and being effective, this is the right time to get involved. I would encourage people to get to, go online to Campaign Life Coalition, register for their emails. I know that they're talking about a lot of exciting things that they want to do. And stay tuned to this show as well, because we're going to have a lot of things to talk about on this subject over the next couple of months as well. So it remains to be seen what the impact of some of the things that are being discussed will be. But I assure people that it's the pro-life movement, and indeed the conservative movement in this country in general, to the degree that conservative and pro-life are hand in glove with one another. The good news again is that we're really, I think, entering into a transitional phase within the conservative movement as well. And I'm excited to be part of it. I'm starting to get up there in years myself, as you are, Nick, as well. We're not quite ready to hang up the cleats, so to speak, or the skates, but there are a lot of really talented young people that are getting involved, that are coming up now through the ranks, and they have great ideas, and they're willing to take some risks, and they're willing to try new things, and I have a lot of optimism for the future. So, things might seem a little dark right now. We have a Liberal government that we're in power that I don't think any of us really is very confident in. I think, the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating. It's beginning to look every day more and more like Andrew Scheer is going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. Mm-hmm. And I say this with the greatest of respect to my friends in the Conservative Party. I'm a movement conservative, and, I want to see them do things as well. And as I know you do as well, Nick. And, here's everybody on notice, okay? When you decide you're going to act as Liberal light, if and when that's the case, then you can rest assured that I'm going to call you on it, and I'm sure you will, Nick, as well. And that's the way it should be. I'm not a trained SEAL. You're not a trained SEAL. And everybody should be on notice about that. I want a truly conservative government. I want to see the party that I have worked for in one capacity or another for most of my adult life. I want to see it start to deliver more effectively on conservative policy and conservative principles. And that's what I'm going to push for whenever the opportunity presents itself. And again, the good news is that I'm not alone, and you're not alone, Nick. There are a lot of us out there, and we're going to be more and more organized and more effective in bringing our case forward and defending our positions, and hopefully making Canada, oh gosh, I hate to say it, great again.
Get used to that phrase, because the longer this goes on, the more often people are going to use it, because Canada once was a magnificent country. It still is one of the best countries in the world, but it's not what it used to be.
Okay, Nick, we got to go for our last break. We're running overtime again.
Imagine that.
Okay, we'll be back in a couple of minutes here in the Combat Zone on thinkradio.ca. Re-entering the Combat Zone. Although, Nick, after listening to that mellow music and the mellow intro for this segment, it's hard for us to really get into the combat mood.
Yeah.
And maybe it has to do with some microdosing of LSD, but we'll get into that in a minute, okay? Yeah, you want to stay stick around for this segment.
Oh,
because
the microdosing. You're not going to believe this.
It's really quite interesting.
You got that right. Okay, so let's talk, before we get into that, there's apparently surprising support for what's called, or the story comes to us from the Spencer Fernando news blog, and it says there's a poll that shows strong support for annual wealth tax on Canadians with assets over $50 million. All right.
15, 1-5 or 5-0?
5-0. I thought it was 500 million when I first read it because I didn't have my eyeballs on. Anyway, okay, so here's how it starts. A new poll shows strong support for a wealth tax which would apply to Canadians with assets of over $50 million. According to a survey by Abacus Data, 67% of Canadians support or somewhat support the idea of a wealth tax. The specific proposal discussed in the poll would apply a 2% tax on Canadians with assets over $50 million. Now think about this. This is on top of what they already are paying in taxes. Okay?
No, I want to know something, Nick.
What's that?
Is this a 2% surtax, a 2% income tax surtax, or a 2% on the assets? Because that's important, because I hear people talk about this. I know people with lots of money tied up in, and the asset here is the important word.
Right.
Because I could have $50 million in stocks.
Right.
In GM, for instance, okay?
Right.
But I don't have, but that's not cash.
That's right.
And my income might actually be zero. And not because I'm applying tax loopholes, but maybe for whatever reason, I didn't get dividends from my investment. I could just as easily be flipping burgers at McDonald's.
That's right.
And still have those assets. And
asset rich, cash poor.
And I'm technically a rich to very wealthy, not just wealthy, but filthy rich.
The article doesn't say.
Okay, so then what happens now is this, okay? My income is low, but so where are you taxing me? Number one. Number two, gosh, we've got to get people to understand this, Nick, okay? That $50 million is not money in my pocket, okay, in the example I've just given. And in most cases with that kind of wealth and higher, that money is tied up in investments that are invariably employing people.
Absolutely.
Maybe not invariably, but in almost every case. If I had $50 million worth of stock at GM, okay, and I'm not getting dividends, that doesn't mean that I don't have that wealth. But all of that wealth, 100% of that wealth, is going into employing workers at GM.
Well, that's where GM gets the capital to operate. Besides, it's the one source they have that doesn't come from the sale of vehicles.
Well, or government bailouts.
Yeah, I don't like government bailouts.
Stuff like that,
yeah,
right? But
you're never too big to fail.
And even if the bank, even in the case where the bank is loaning them money or investing, okay, because banks, or even when they're loaning the money, the bank charges interest, the bank makes a profit, and then the bank either pays you, who have money in a savings account or in the account with the bank, pays you interest.
That's right.
Or if you have a mutual fund, okay, then you're just a typical working class or middle class Canadian. You have mutual funds, you have RRSPs, and a number of those mutual funds invest in bank stock. And so when the bank makes a profit, that's good for you because some of that profit is going into dividends that's going into your savings and your RSP as your mutual fund grows that you're going to retire on. It is a bald-faced lie when people go, oh, that guy's got $50 million. He's not sitting on a trunk with $50 million in cash or jewels at home. He could theoretically be, but he's pretty stupid business person if he was doing that.
Right. If he's a drug lord, he might do that. But other than that,
even drug lords employ people.
Well, fair enough. But
are you speaking here of the government, by the way?
You know what? You could today, couldn't you?
Yeah. Remember, the government now is selling you your narcotics, your drugs, and I'm not talking about prescription. and they're in the drug business, they're in the booze business, and they're in the verge of getting into the prostitution business. And my question is, what is so different between that and Al Capone? Al Capone must be up there somewhere or down there somewhere having the last laugh, because it turns out that he was just a man ahead of his time.
Yeah. Well, what's that old saying? The government hates competition.
So,
okay, so let me finish with this. Go ahead.
Speaking about drugs, okay, LSD microdosing.
Okay, fine.
So come on.
Let's do this.
You read this story.
I did. I have it right here.
Okay, go for it.
All right, I'm going to read you just a paragraph or two out of this story. It's from the Times Post. Okay, let me blow this up a little bit with my super duper highly technical blower upper. There we go. Okay. Unlike earlier...
For you NSA listening posts out there, Nick's talking about a magnifier on his computer, not actually blowing things up.
Oh, no, I meant that is in making it larger, not destroying it.
Okay, I don't want to read this on WikiLeaks next month.
Yeah, the only leak is in my boat. Anyway, unlike earlier LSD experiments in the 1950s, psychedelic-guided therapy today is largely based on that's what they're calling microdosing. Is largely based on a phenomenon known as ego dissolution, the belief that a person's sense of self as distinct from the rest of the world dissolves during a psychedelic experience, allowing them to gain a new sense of connections and boundlessness. One more paragraph just to underline the absurdity of all this.
What's the headline of this story?
The headline of this story is, let me scroll back up now, is microdosing LSD a solution to the crisis of the meaning in modern life? The answer is no, but that's not the point. All right, one more.
So this is the way that they're talking about you discovering the meaning of life.
Apparently.
Escape from life.
Escapology.
There, is that a word?
It is now.
It is now. Okay, we've just coined a new word on the Combat Zone, guys. Escapology.
All right, one more paragraph. Psychedelic psychotherapy is more about full-on macrodosing. Microdosing, by contrast, involves subperceptual hits, perceptual hits, typically 1/10 of a recreational dose, means that there should be no altered states of consciousness, no visions, no wavering lights, no breathing wood. It's less about being at one with all forms of life and more about just getting through the day.
Sounds a lot to me like just getting high.
That's another excuse to get stoned. As a matter of fact, you mentioned a movie or a book.
Right. Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World. Brave New World. In the Brave New World, when the crowd started to get unruly and protesting, etc., they would spray the crowd with soma. And everybody was happy. It was the happy drug.
That's right.
So this is going on. What I find the most telling in this is the headline, and then the whole idea that somehow or other you can get closer to the meaning of life by escaping it through getting high. Like, Nick, is there something that I'm missing? I mean, really, I honest to goodness, I think that it's us living in a. Sometimes I think that it's us living in a parallel universe. Like, we're the ones.
You could very well be right, but I think what's happened is you haven't had your microdose today.
Well, I've had more than my microdose of a few things. Trust me, but none of them have to do with escaping reality. I just, are there people out there that take this seriously? Apparently so.
Well, there are 909 of them spread across 29 countries.
And by the way, in case you're wondering, I would bet the farm, Nick, if I had one, that this is being paid for by tax dollars.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt of that at all. And you're not betting my farm either, by the way. But what, on a more serious side, it's fun to laugh at, but how are people ever going to learn to cope with the realities of life if they never expose themselves to it? What's the difference between an alcoholic escaping life and somebody who's microdosing? It's just the intensity?
Or not microdosing. Maybe they're just, they're toking and stuff like that.
Whatever. Choose your poison.
Yeah.
The point is that those things, look, all of us like to go to a movie and escape for an hour and a half or 2 hours, or in the case of Gandhi, 9 hours, escape reality, and just immerse yourself into another world, and you want to be part of it. Like, maybe it's the latest Star Trek movie, or maybe you went and saw Dunkirk, or whether you went and you've seen a movie that you really just sank your teeth into. Okay, but at the end, when the movie's over, you have to come back and face reality again, and all your problems are still there. All you did was escape them for a little while. So a mature, fundamentally well-rounded adult is going to say, okay, let's take a couple hours off just to relax and unwind. We'll enjoy this, and then we'll come back to life. How does it work in this case? If you are always at some level intoxicated by something, you never deal with these things. You never learn to grow up and make your own bed, as Jordan Peterson would say.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just
feeling happy.
I'm feeling happy, Nick. Well, my wife says to me, she says, how are you feeling? I go, I'm feeling depressed. She says, you sure? Yeah, I'm always depressed. She says, are you depressed today? I go, I'm always depressed. She said, are you tired? I'm always tired. Are you hungry? I'm always hungry. Look, I'd make a joke about it. Seriously, maybe it's not a joking matter. People out there are struggling. There is mental illness, there is depression, there is all this stuff. But how much of it stems from this is a serious question. How much of anxiety disorders, of depression, of all of these things, apart from the sort of the clinical chemical induced type of mental illness and the stuff that's really physiologic, based on physiology, how much of it is, it really comes down to just not learning to be, to a certain degree, mentally tough. Have a little bit of mental toughness, a little bit of emotional toughness, a little bit of, somebody called you a name, big deal. As my parents taught me, sticks and stones. Sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt you. Sounds, corny and square and all of those words.
Yep.
But
quaint.
But there's a lot of wisdom in that. Okay.
Of course there is.
And this is why I don't get upset when people call me names and things like that. But if somebody today, you call somebody a name and they're calling for, parliamentary investigations, police charges, some sort of a government-funded campaign to discourage people from being bullies. And again, I'm not defending, let's say, to take bullies, for instance, I'm not defending bullying. Of course I'm not, okay? But, at some point in time, kids have to learn to put up with adversity in life.
Or stand up for themselves.
Or stand up to the adversity, or stand up to bullies, or ignore them. There's no reason why not being part of the crowd should have this kind of devastating emotional impact on people. And I know I'm getting myself into trouble now. Now you see, this is the non-trained SEAL part of me. This is me being a SEAL that's not trained.
Yeah, you haven't figured out how to bounce the ball yet.
I can. I'm a rugby player. We don't use our heads with the balls, okay?
Yeah, that's
I'm sorry, a former rugby player.
See, that's the second most boring sport on TV.
Rugby?
No, soccer.
Oh, soccer.
Good Lord, that's painful.
What's the most boring? And if
British carp fishing.
Okay.
That, I won't bore you with the details, but that will put you to sleep faster than watching paint dry.
Well, I'm glad you didn't say synchronized swimming.
At least synchronized swimming, the ladies look good. What's good looking about a carp?
Is there men's synchronized swimming?
That's a good question.
I don't know that there is.
Well, guess what? We're going to find out.
Nick's
Come here, Google.
There's that free associating again. Yeah, this microdosing, this LSD thing, it's not so much. I'm not as troubled by the fact that they're playing around with this and they're doing a study, etc. That's troubling enough, Nick. But the attitude, the notion that, somehow you can discover the meaning of life in that, it's just absurd. I'm getting the thumbs up from Nick here. That means that there is male
synchronized swimming.
Synchronized swimming.
One of the headlines is UK male synchronized swim team fights for Olympics.
Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. Male synchronized swimming. In the late 19th century, synchronized swimming was a male-only event. However, in the 20th century, it became a woman's sport, with men banned from many competitions. In the U.S., men were allowed to participate with women until 1941, when synchronized swimming became part of the Amateur Athletic Union. There you go. So, yes, there is.
Okay, so I've just discovered one thing more boring than soccer, Nick.
Male synchronized swimming.
Listening to you narrate the history of male synchronized swimming.
But I cannot, to this day, I cannot believe anyone would watch British carp fishing. They sit around about a 2-acre pond, and there's like 20 upturned 5-gallon pails with numbers on them, from 1 to 22 or 23. And the commentators, they all whisper.
Have you seen some of the darts competitions on television?
I'd rather watch darts.
Oh my goodness gracious! No, I'm not saying they're boring. I'm saying that
the other way around.
No, they've got the crowd into it and everything.
Yeah.
Man, I'm telling you, you could almost fill a stadium with 50,000 people.
I figured out why darts became popular. I'm not going to talk about when I was watching a movie today called Lancaster Skies. It's about a British bomber crew during World War II. It's a brand new release. And anyway, I'm watching it, or a relatively new release. And the pilots and the bomber crews are all standing around throwing darts. And the reason that it became popular is because, first of all, there were so many air crew that it was a way to kill time between missions. So rather than just sit around and worry about what was coming up, you'd engage in a game of darts. It was the same reason they went drinking or, chasing women or all this stuff. They didn't want to think about the risk that was ahead of them. So they would get together in the pub and they'd have a pint or two and they'd throw darts. And that was their distraction before they got back into their airplane and hope they got back again. I'm just surmising that based on that one scene. And I'm probably reading way too much into it or got my facts completely wrong, but to me it makes sense. So that's where darts, actually, from what I can understand, that's when dart popularity. I'm not saying that's where darts started. I have a feeling that game's been around for thousands of years. But that's, as far as modern culture is concerned, that's kind of what got it off the ground, pardon the pun.
I think we need a little bit of that LSD now.
Yeah, we could use.
Okay, we've exhausted a whole bunch of topics here tonight, but as we're coming to the end of the show soon. You're signaling me.
Yeah, because we haven't talked about Battle of the Atlantic Sunday.
Oh, okay, quickly, yeah. Let's.
This past Sunday was a annual celebration or commemoration. I don't want to use celebration, wrong word, of the Battle of the Atlantic Sunday, and I think it's one of Canada's greatest contributions to World War II. The other one that you could argue back and forth about which one was more significant was the British Air Commonwealth Training Plan.
Yes, and Nick and I do argue about it.
Yeah, not much. Like, let's face it, both were hugely significant. So you're talking about very slender lead here over which one was more important. But especially with my sailor's bias, the Battle of the Atlantic lasted from the first day of the war to the last. It took over 2,000 Canadian sailors died. And the most courageous members of the Battle of the Atlantic weren't wearing naval uniforms. They were
Merchant Marine.
You got it. Imagine this. Stepping on the gangplank of a ship that weighs 10,000 tons and is carrying thousands of gallons of aviation fuel. And you've got to go 4,000 miles through U-boat-infested water, hoping...
on an unarmed ship.
In an unarmed ship, hoping that the little corvettes that did the bulk of the lion's share of escort duty, especially as the war progressed, could keep the U-boats at bay long enough for you to make it to England. That took guts.
Courage personified.
You got it. And some of them had ships torpedoed out from underneath them 4 and 5 times.
Yeah.
You want to talk about a case for PTSD? There you go.
Yeah, but they did it.
They did it over and over and over again.
And saved the free world.
They certainly did.
The Battle of Britain. The Battle of Britain was an important, one might even argue, decisive battle early in the war.
But it would not have been possible.
The reality is that the Battle of Britain would not have been possible without the Merchant Marine and the Royal Navy and the Royal Canadian Navy.
And not Hitler, but Churchill always said that the one thing that really frightened him about the war, the only thing that really scared him about the war, was the U-boat war. If they had been able to shut down the flow of oil, Britain would have had to sue for peace.
Well, not just oil, food.
Mainly oil.
Okay, weapons.
All of it, but
it was, and especially once Lend-Lease got going in the United States, they had to get everything, the supplies and everything, over to England, and that was, I don't want to take anything away from our American friends. I think their contribution to the war effort was nothing short of stupendous.
Oh, yeah.
Once they got in.
Yeah.
But it took them a while to get in and to get geared up. And quite literally, the Royal Navy, I think the Royal Navy and the Royal Canadian Navy jointly, and the unsung heroes of the Merchant Marines of both Great Britain and Canada.
Well, of all the free world.
Are all of them, yeah. But there's them in particular, I think they saved Western democracy.
You're not going to get any argument out of me because, like I said, you step on a fully loaded ammunition or a fuel tank that's got a bullseye on it the size of the whole length of the hull of the ship. Takes a kind of courage I don't think most of us will ever understand.
Nick, it's coming to the top of the hour. We have had a robust discussion on a multitude of topics.
And I like
that.
Some
controversial, some not so controversial. But we cannot let the show pass without passing on a congratulations and a salute to Prince Harry and his wife, Meghan, and to their new son, who will be an earl, not a prince, my understanding is. And what was his name? Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor.
The kid was doomed the moment he was conceived.
What a terrible thing to say.
It's true.
No, so welcome to the world, Archie. He's not Sir Archie yet, and that'll come at some point in time.
All I know is the kid with a name like that, the kid is going to have. The only reason he's not going to be tortured to death in school and teased mercilessly is because his bodyguards won't allow it.
No, it'll be more than that. It'll be because his dad, Prince Harry, who is an avid rugby fan and rugby player, and by the way, that's rugby union, not that sissy rugby league stuff, will teach him a thing or two about how to fight your way through adversity on the pitch. And
Isn't he a soldier?
Who? Harry?
No, his dad. Yeah, Harry.
Harry. Yes. Well, he was anyway. He flew helicopters. Isn't he?
Yeah, I think you're right. He flew.
Why are you cutting off your microphone when you're talking?
I have no idea why I did that.
Okay.
Anyway, it doesn't matter.
You
Show's
need a
over.
little more micro dosing there. Okay,
Obviously.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a lot of fun tonight. Thanks for tuning in. We will catch you next week in the Combat Zone.